Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Danny here. Today I'm talking to you about Buster Keel. So Buster Keel, written and drawn by Kenshiro Sakamoto, and this is his second manga he's ever done. And I saw some people say that he used to be an editor for Fairy Tail, and that made a lot of sense, but after doing some research, he's actually not. I don't know if he is now for Eden Zero. I don't think so, because I think Hero has the same team he had since he did Fairy Tail. But we'll get into why that would have made sense later. And this was a monthly manga published in Shonen Rival magazine. Only other manga to note from this was Blazer Drive. And this was a manga that me, Jerry, and Keel read. And I find that interesting, and I'll get back into that later as well. Came out in 2008 and ended in 2012, 47 chapters in total. Fantasy setting here with our main character Keel wandering around town trying to find this beast tamer. I don't think it's called beast tamer. This adventurer named Shiva, who he has a grudge against, and doing some digging in town, he finds out that there's a person named Lavi who was the disciple of Shiva, and he figures, well, if I find her, then we could find him. Bumps into her, and then we meet her with her little monster companion Mishi, this flying pig, and she uses melody magic. That's what it's called, where she has a guitar and uses the powers there to assist the monsters in her team, like boosting attacks, healing, all that sort of stuff. And then, as a chapter usually goes, for the first chapter, a conflict happens, and Keel reveals who he really is, and that is that he is a monster known as the Dragon Ape. It is an S-rank monster, one of the most feared, but he is trapped in this human body by having this collar on his neck that was put on there by Shiva. And by Lavi playing some music to try to help buff him up, right? So she could give a ring to a monster, and then they could wear it, and so that way it only affects them, because this type of magic affects all monsters regardless, unless they have these rings on them. And by doing this, it sort of lifted part of the spell that is on Keel, revealing his right arm into the Dragon Ape form, and he's able to fight with that with ease. And so they decide to team up and just travel and try to find Shiva, and along the way just have a normal adventure. And that's where we start off for the most part. Eventually we meet another main character named Blue, and as we find out, he's also a demon, specifically from the Water Demon tribe, and he's on a revenge quest because they were all murdered, and he is the only one left. So he's trying to seek out that person who is the main antagonist for the most part of the series, and that is Kurokiri. So this series was something I picked up because I was like, I kind of want something that's already over, something that's not too long. And as I saw this, and I was like, oh, okay, cool, I'll check it out. I didn't know it was monthly, so that part kind of dragged it on for a bit. But other than that, yeah, so I decided to pick it up. And, it's not edginess, I would say. I would say more of big punk energy, right? And, I was thinking of what year this came out. I'm like, yeah, this is close to the mid-2000s, late 2000s. This was that era where manga sort of had that punk feel to it, right? With the designs and the art on the chapter covers, and that's why I mentioned it was interesting that Blazer Drive was also in this magazine, because that has a lot of punk energy as well. One part that drew me in, where I was like, okay, let's see where this goes. I'm interested to see what's going on. But the further I read, the further I was like, yeah, I'm just reading this to pass the time. And I mentioned why. Earlier I mentioned it was interesting that people thought this was the assistant for Fairy Tail. I said it was probably believable because this has so much in common with Fairy Tail. It's almost ridiculous. Like early Fairy Tail stuff before we got all ridiculous and started having a lot more main characters show up. Our main 3 to 4 characters are easily represented as the main 3 to 4 characters in Fairy Tail, to the point where we get Lavi's backstory about who she is and where she's from. It's the exact same as Lucy's. It's crazy. Keel's design is also very similar. And then with Blue, the similarity is the element of magic that they use, right? And also, it's set in a fantasy world. So that, to me, was just like, I was telling the guys, I was like, this is Fairy Tail just not written as good. And that's the biggest problem here in the entire series, is the writing. It's very generic. It's like at the base of what a shonen should be. Like, this is the level. This is where you start. I mentioned that before with Black Clover, where I was like, this is a very generic manga, but at least it had its own flair to it to make it distinct, to where, like, we know what we're doing. Let's go at a neck break speed, so that way at least this is interesting. And then here, it's that there's interesting ideas and a cool few things, but other than that, it's just your run-of-the-mill shonen. Nothing to really look at. On the site I was checking it out, it said it was canceled. Honestly, not surprised. 4 years is a good run for a monthly manga most of the time, but I'm surprised it lasted as long as it did. It's just pretty meh. One of the main problems when it comes to a shonen series is the way our main characters resolve their conflicts with any enemies that they fight. And in here, it's the biggest problem of them all. So where there's not a lot of exposition, minimal fighting, and the antagonist, the villain, whatever they're fighting, just says, "Oh, you're right. I'm sorry, guys. Let's make up and come to an understanding." And then they go their separate ways. Always disappointing to see. And another one is the one-trick pony thing, right? And that's with our main character, Keel. For a long time, majority of this series, he has to rely on Lavi to unlock his dragon ape arm, so that way he could fight better, because it not only does it unlock his original arm, but it makes him stronger as well, right? Because this human form seals how strong he actually is. There was one moment, which was during the tournament arc, where he had a fight in his human form the entire time, and I was like, okay, cool, finally, because just the way he fights every single time, it's the same thing. He fights for a bit, he could get some good hits in, but then he gets pretty wrecked. It's, just tells Lavi, yo, unlock the arm, gets the arm unlocked, and it either goes of two ways. He defeats the enemy, or he has a better chance of fighting him, but he's still kind of getting whooped, and then eventually he just comes around and ends it. Now, this is a big problem, right, because there's nothing engaging, nothing satisfying to look at. The fights are as they are, nothing too spectacular in the choreography here. The art does kind of complement it a little bit. Early style of manga art during this time, like early Fairy Tail, early One Piece feel to it. So it has that going for it. And at the end, the art does look nice. But yeah, for the most part, the fights aren't all that exciting. Even at the very end, it's just what you would expect from a series. There's nothing that caught me by surprise. Another part that's disappointing is with our main characters here. They have limiters on them, right? Keel's limit is that, I'm trapped in this human body. And then Blue's limit is that, I can only go so hard until I can transform into my demon form. And then even then, it's only just this much higher in strength. And they had one training section just to show off, like, they're actually got a little bit stronger. They're mastering their powers better. But immediately after, in the next fight, it's just the same stuff going on. There's no confidence. Well, there is confidence, but there's just no utter defeat of an enemy, unless that enemy used to be a friend of Keel's. So it just feels like the characters aren't progressing at all. Like, they're just traveling this world, but it doesn't feel like they've gained new powers, new strength. Because the fights always play out the same. So that's just a big disappointment. It's just not really interesting. And the enemies, the main antagonists are as generic as they can get. So there's nothing special about that. And the final section, right, the last fight, it's just what you would expect from a series. And then the ending is just kind of disappointing because, again, it's one of those things where the antagonist does something and it just makes no sense why they would do it. And then, of course, it's not a basic shonen series without the power of friendship, and that's coming in here a lot. So, what am I trying to say, guys? It wasn't necessarily disappointing. I was just, this is a meh series. Something to just pass the time on before I could get to something that's better. And you hate to say that when you are talking about a series like this, but it's just nothing special. I will say, though, it does have a good community at the time when this was coming out. Especially towards the end, I saw a lot of comments and people talking about the series. So, it captured its audience for sure, but I also saw the other side of the audience saying like, oh yeah, this is just a fairy tale ripoff. And for the most part, it really is, it sucks to say. And it's also funny to say that because at the end, the manga pointed out, it's like, yeah, I don't know if you guys noticed, but this is also a parody or my version of Journey to the West. And I thought, oh, okay, I mean, that's cool that you could take the structure of that story and then just make your own world and all that. But what you made out of it just didn't have a lasting impression. And it can show when you look it up online. It is what it is. I mean, hey, some of the designs are cool. I'll give it that. But it really is part of its era, early to late 2000s with the punk energy. Like, that's what it had going for it. But then as that sort of faded out and it got more serious, it's like, oh, actually, there's nothing special. So, hate to say it, but yeah, I would say skip this one. If you want a fantasy story that's just there, go ahead, read the first few arcs, and then you can go from there. But yeah, I will say a lot of things are pretty predictable in the series. That's all I have to say today, guys, about Buster Keel. But hey, while we wait for the next episode, remember you can email us unversepodcast@gmail.com. Any questions or comments? Are you part of the fan base that likes this series? We'd love to hear your opinions. Talk about it on the next episode, as always. And while we wait for that episode, you can follow us anywhere on social media at Unverse Podcast. Let you know when those episodes drop. So thanks, guys, and we'll catch you next time.